Charlie, so happy that you're on the show.
Welcome back, huh?
I know, it's been forever. So we have a fun topic we're going to be digging into
What we got today?
So we were talking, not necessarily you and me. I actually don't know who I was talking to, but it was way back earlier this year.
All right.
When Albertson bought Safeway or put in the bid. And the big discussion was, well, you can't merge 2 and 3 on the scale of grocers or
grocery stores.
Grocers. If number 2 largest grocer and number 3 merge, then they're going to dominate the entire.
They're going to get bigger than number 1.
Correct.
What you're saying? Okay.
So the big fear is we can't allow them to do that. So it brought up this discussion that I really want to talk about today, which is, can a company become too big? What are the pros? What are the cons? What's history say about it? What's the government, how they've intervened in the past? And then look at some big companies today that haven't been broke up.
Right.
And just have a good discussion around that because it is an interesting topic.
Well, you brought up the one thing that scares me is you said the government might intervene and make a decision.
They don't do that. Come on. The government's pretty good. All right.
What you got?
No sarcasm here. All right. So this is all stores right now. I'm not sure everybody can see this,
top 10 grocery chains in the U.S.
But this isn't just grocers, because if you look at Walmart, there's so much more than a grocery store.
Right.
Number 2 on this list is Amazon. Like, they do everything. You can buy a house, a car, and they're number 2 in this space. So the top bunch of these is more than just a grocer, like Costco. The top 3. And then you get down to 4, which is Kroger, and then Albertson, and then way further down that doesn't actually meet this list because this is global, you'd see Safeway. So they did end up merging, I believe, and they're the number 1 true grocer. And this is really where this discussion came in. But even on this list right here, we're going to be talking so much about Amazon today.
But I think it's interesting. If you look at that list, you think most of them are brick and mortar grocery store type businesses. And then there's Amazon, and you think, oh, that's just all delivery somewhere.
Yeah. They do so much more than just deliver, right?
I know it.
You can buy anything through there. And I think I might have misspoke. So you had it was number 1 at this time. It was number 1 and number 2, at least according to the stats that I found online. And as they merged, they were going to be 5 times bigger than the next competing company.
Did the government
they allowed
scrutinize it? And they allowed it.
They did scrutinize it, but then they said okay.
All right.
And there's probably more than meets the eye on why they said okay, because my guess is if they didn't, a lot more might have happened in other industries, which we're going to talk about.
Okay.
So let's jump in and let's talk about some other different sectors out here. Oh, let's talk about Amazon again. So the first one up that I had found was just cloud computing. So I wanted to see in different random spaces across the world, who's the biggest players and what is the government doing, if anything, and what's the landscape look like? So Azure, which we were talking earlier.
Right. That was the Microsoft.
Microsoft owned, and this is cloud computing. I mean, just about everything in today's world runs in a cloud somewhere.
It seems like that's where it's all going.
So this is a very big industry. It basically runs the internet. It runs the most businesses. And Azure's been around about the longest on this list. Actually, I think they're the oldest. Azure launched right at the end of my college career. I was a career college.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And just when I was done, I was working at a company in Raleigh, and they had launched through this company, which no longer exists, Azure. And so it's been around for a long time. And they are currently 2. Who took over number 1? They're Azure's 21%, and that's really tough to see.
Yep, and Amazon's 34.
21%. Amazon's 34%. And Amazon's only been in that space probably 10 to 15 years.
I was going to say, how much of a head start did Azure have?
More than double. And they're already second place by a huge margin.
Bit, yeah.
Okay, but the thing I actually like about this is there's really no dominant. I mean, you could say Amazon is dominating that space. I mean, they have the most commercials. Most people have never even heard of Azure. They don't advertise, where Amazon is all like AWS and the NFL.
Amazon's everywhere.
Amazon's everywhere.
Azure, I bet most people don't know what that is.
No, it's Microsoft Cloud-based, and it runs so much of the world, not as much anymore because of AWS.
You know, it's interesting. I see 2 Chinese companies up there. I wonder how quickly they might take off with the population in that area.
I don't know. I mean, this is probably the biggest one, right?
Alibaba and Tencent. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know this one that well. Even Salesforce.
Well, they're into a lot of things too. I know Tencent Music and some other things. So I think these big companies have a way of jumping into a lot of different areas.
Yeah, but even looking at this, nothing jumps off the page going, okay, heaven forbid the government jump in. But there's nothing on here that literally says, hey, you know, it's way out of proportion. Even Google down here, which we're going to talk about in a minute, you know, they're half, right? So they're half of Azure. They haven't been in as long, but they've been in about as long as AWS. The next thing I want to talk about is search. So before I click on this, who do you think's the number 1 player in search?
Think Google's up there?
I think Google's up here. So here we go.
I didn't realize it'd be that big.
So Google is 92% of global search.
Well, you know, it's so big that Google is now a verb. We're going to Google it. Yep.
So 92%. So my radar immediately goes off here. We are 92% dominant, not just in a country like the United States. We're talking global. That means Google isn't just a verb here. Google is a global verb, you know, across the world, dominating 90. And this is current. This is as of April
2023.
This is super current.
Wow.
So that means the next biggest player at a whopping 2.7% is Microsoft again. What do you know? We're seeing a lot of the same names outside of grocery. Even in grocery, we have seen the same names in everything we've talked about so far, even though they're completely different industries. We talked grocery. Now we're talking cloud storage. Now we're talking search.
I think once you get large enough like that, you can afford to
branch out,
go into other areas, and probably buy smaller companies and, you know, automatically have that technology and just build it from there.
Yeah, I read an article the other day that talked about, you know, AI is such a big thing right now. And where Elon and his brilliance, you know, he's like, hey, you know, he's all cautious about AI. And then they started, I think last month, they started their own AI, which is X.ai.
All right.
You know,
yep.
Because I don't know what X means, but X.ai. And he came out publicly now, which has been a bunch of weeks, and he said, you know, you need a minimum of $250 million in servers just to adequately compete and develop AI.
Oh, wow.
So we're talking a huge, very wealthy organization and individual, and he's like, yeah, we're just going to drop $250 million just to set up shop. Like that's what you get.
But he's
with these
operating
big
like these big companies.
Yeah.
I mean, because you got Tesla, you got his Space Force, and Amazon's going up into space too. So it's just amazing.
The money.
How they
look what Facebook did. Facebook went all in on augmented reality, and they're spending tens of billions of dollars. Now they're scaling it back because they're like, oh, shoot, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Wasting billions.
Yeah.
For what? It got them actually nowhere.
Well, I think most of the world doesn't know what a metaverse is. So, you know,
I'm not sure.
I don't know what it was going to benefit or what the benefit was either. So,
all right. So let's talk about operating systems. So we talked grocers. We've talked, that's interesting. We've talked advertisements.
Advertising.
We should have talked about advertisements. That popped up. Now let's talk operating systems. So here in America, if you talk to just about anybody and you're like, what kind of phone you have, or if you look around, you will notice that iOS, Apple, fairly dominates.
You shocked me when you showed me some of these numbers. I couldn't believe it.
So we're in this skewed little world. If we scroll down here, we're probably going to notice in the US, let's go down to the US here, because this is where most people are thinking that are listening to this. Apple represents about 57% of iOS operating. So if somebody's got a phone in the US, there's a 50%
a little bit better
chance
than half chance. It's going
to be iPhone.
Yep.
If you look at the rest of the world, Okay, this is where it gets a little crazy.
This has shocked me.
Yeah, we're talking, where was it? No, up here, 76%. 76% of the global cell phone operating system is owned by none other than Google, Android.
That's just shocking.
So 87%, and they're actually saying, 76%, when this article was written, which is obviously very old, they're anticipating it being, I didn't even look for the new one, but they're anticipating it being in the mid 80s now of global dominance. So just like Google dominated search, now the whole big thing is, well, is AI and Google's behind, we've got all these other open AI and chat GPT, and they're going to lose their edge. Well, good. They're at 90. They have plenty to lose. They'll still be a big player.
Yeah, but I wonder if when you got two big players like that, could there be some sort of collusion to keep
everybody out?
Yeah.
And that's part of our discussion. Like, is big too big? Not because it's bad or because it's good. Like, what can go wrong? Because they could squeeze out everybody. There's so much cash to do whatever they want. They control everything. So you've got iOS on phones, you've got cloud, you've got groceries, you've got search, and you're seeing the same names.
Right. And this is something that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, this is all current.
Yeah.
Every single thing is current. So let's look a little bit backwards.
Okay.
And let's see how big companies were way back in the day where the government says, hey, time out. This isn't good for our economy. This isn't good for this country. This isn't good, period. The consumer is the one hurt. We need to make a change. So the first one we're going to talk about is
the oil companies.
Standard Oil. So Standard Oil was founded in 1870, a long time ago. And at their peak, they were 91% of the U.S. oil production, representing 85% of all sales. That is massive.
That's essentially the whole thing.
That sounds like Google search dominance. Yep. But this was just U.S. This wasn't even global. So this is just in the U.S. The government steps in 1911.
So I wasn't around to see this one.
It was probably pretty close, though.
I was young.
I'm not sure my grandparents. I think he was born in the. Well, I'm not even sure. And so the government steps in 1911, and they're like, "Hey, we can't do this timeout."
Big enough to break it into 34 smaller
companies.
Wow!
And here's the crazy thing: over several decades, these companies changed hands. In the 70s, they started consolidating. So here's what they did: the government said, "We're going to go from one to many." And then these companies even went many more because they split and then they started consolidating. And then as time goes on, they consolidate back from 1 to 4 over a decade. Over a century.
Right.
So in 100 years, you had one huge company, the government breaks it all up. And then because of business, the way people work, everything bought back. And now it's 4 companies. And these are the companies we all know today. We've got Chevron, Exxon, British Petroleum, BP, and Marathon. I don't know anybody in America that doesn't know these 4 companies.
No, I believe that's
and it all started with Standard Oil. So it was 91%, and I guess I should have looked that up. How much percent is the U.S. dominated by those 4? I bet you it's in the mid-80s.
It's probably significant.
Yeah. So did it really work?
Well, I don't know. It takes 100 years or so to see where everything goes, doesn't it?
Well,
but that's kind of the flow of, I think, businesses like that.
Where they get broken up?
They get broken up, but then they find ways to come back together.
I would love to know if the government hadn't stepped in, what would have happened to Standard Oil? Like, would prices be outrageous? Because you have global production now, right? And now the U.S. everything's different. And, is pricing better or worse now? There's a lot more regulations now. And the landscape has changed. So I couldn't say good or bad. I wasn't around. I've just always known these companies, right? Yeah. All I know is the current environment we live in, and I wouldn't know any different. So this is Standard Oil. Let's talk about another one.
All right.
we've got AT&T Corp.
Now, I was kind of growing up when all
Yes.
this was going on. Ma Bell and the Baby Bells.
Ma Bell.
Yeah.
All right. So we had in 1984, the government steps in and says, AT&T, you're too big. And they represented, I mean, it was, what was it represented? They were huge. I think I've got there was only 3 major players in 1984.
And I couldn't tell you who the other ones were.
No, because they were the biggest. I think they were 90, again, another 90%er that just dominated the phone market, communications. And the government steps in and says, okay, we're going to take this Ma Bell, this huge company, and then we're going to make all these little baby bells. All right. So that's where Bell South came in, which was a big player up in Michigan. AT&T still had a big chunk. Mm-hmm. Then you have Ameritech, Pacific. You have Southwestern Bell, these baby bells. Bell Atlantic, it's so funny. US West and NYNEX. Man, NYNEX, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
It's disappeared.
Huh? It has completely disappeared.
There's Mr. Verizon there.
Well, that's what NYNEX turned into Verizon.
Yeah.
So all of this, you had one company turned into many in 1984 in less than, 20 years? 40 years?
Yeah.
It's back down to 3. So one went to 2, 4, 6, 8 companies, now back down to 3.
So what's the threshold that these monopolies have to achieve that the government says, okay, it's time for me to step in and break you up?
I don't know, because I don't know the real need that they needed to break them up. You know, I guess they didn't have the foresight to realize how much communications was going to change, because back then it was just telephone.
Yep.
Now you have landlines, you have wireless, you have internet, you have cable, you have all these, and cable was coming out in the 80s. You had all of these things happening, and the government's like, no, we just need to break you up. But the reality is the industry was changing. They probably didn't need to break them up at all.
But that's true. Like AT&T, didn't they have Warner Brothers Discover that they spun off?
They spun off. Well,
be in the entertainment business and everything.
Everything's changed. Yeah. And now you've got, everything's changed in the movies, and then you have streaming movies and movies that go to the movie theater. The movie industry has been rocked since the pandemic. That's been another interesting thing to see how that's changed. So I guess that brings up the whole point of this show. We've gone through tons of history, and we've seen companies that the U.S. literally said, you can't be that big, we're changing you, which it blows my mind.
And now companies can't merge without permission. Yeah.
And then you have a company where you have number 2 and number 1 and number 2 merge. And now they're so much significantly bigger than everybody else. Yet, if you look at all the grocers, they don't even rank in the top 5, because you have these big players way out there that do other things too,
right?
That are dominating everything, and the government doesn't do anything for them. Like, why hasn't the government broken up Google? Why hasn't the government broken up Amazon?
That's a good question.
What? I mean, they're dominating.
Do you think money behind it to politicians has something to do with it?
I don't know. I think the reason, and we talked about this earlier, and we're going to talk about pros and cons of this in a second, but I think, there's so many lobbyists.
Yep.
And if you look at the Albertson and Safeway decision, my guess is there's lobbyists that control much bigger things as saying, you have to let this happen. Because if you don't, we might have a problem. So, because there's bigger things at play, because one domino affects another, right? I don't know that to be true. I'm not that smart. It's way above my pay grade, but my brain goes there.
Oh, yeah. You can't help but think something like that.
No. So,
and then the bigger companies, the bigger they get, they probably have more money to put through their lobbyists to make sure they get their way.
Yeah. I don't know.
What made the government say, okay, Standard Oil, you're a little bit too large. Let's split you up 34 ways.
That's just nuts.
It is. I mean,
who was the person that was like, yeah, we're going to make 34 companies? Why 34?
Exactly.
Like, yeah, I don't. And who was the one that was in charge of all that? Somebody made a lot of money.
Somebody's doing all right for themselves.
Somebody. So let's talk about the pros and cons of the. Let's talk first about the pros.
All right.
What are the best benefits? So we asked our favorite AI, what are some big benefits of a company being super large, like a Google being super dominant in search, or an Amazon being dominant in many different areas? What are those good benefits? The first one is economies of scale.
Well, that makes so much sense. If you've got a good heart and you're a monopoly, then you can offer, less expensive stuff.
Because you can buy everything.
You can buy everything. Exactly. You've got so much power to bring the pricing down to whatever your widget is.
The logic says, hey, instead of us only being able to buy this small quantity, we can buy enough quantity for everything, which pushes those prices down, right?
It's kind of like when you go to Costco. I'm going to buy this great big box of cereal, and it's going to be cheaper than if I were to buy individual boxes.
Or I'm going to buy 27 boxes of cereal because it's even cheaper then.
There you go.
So that's the whole concept of economies of scale. Is the logic says if there's one big company that just dominated, everything should be cheaper. That is a pro.
Everything could be cheaper.
Could be. Should be. Stability. Huge company.
It's not going anywhere. You have a recession or you have a lot of the nonsense that goes on in life. It's still going to be able to weather the storm.
Research and development. And this is what we talked about earlier, that these big companies can just throw money at stuff.
Yep.
Back in the day, this research and development thing was big because they're like, hey, we need to make sure we keep a stranglehold on our dominance in this sector. Now companies are like, okay, we're dominating here. Let's take all of our profit. Let's go dominate here. Let's go dominate here. And now you have the companies like Amazon and Google and Apple where they're just getting their hands in everything.
They really can stretch it out.
And that's what they're doing because they have the capital and they're not trying to be the best in any player. They're trying to be really good in multiple industries because it's way more profitable than just dominating one.
But now think about it. Once you're into everything, your name is everywhere. And then that probably gives you, all right, I'm going to start another little side business over here, and it's going to be called Amazon something. And people are automatically going to say, I got a good way of thinking with Amazon.
And then the last pro, which is interesting, there's 4 big things: economies of scale, stability, research and development, R&D, and then job security. Like I have this huge company. I'm not going anywhere. My brain doesn't say job security there because you're like the biggest target. Because there's no guarantee, like if I'm number one, I'm always going to be number one, especially in a day and age where the government's like, hey, we're not going to let you stay number one. So the pro there wouldn't even seem to be logical from my standpoint. I'm like, well, if I'm the low man on the totem pole and we're big and we start losing market share, I won't get cut.
Yeah, but I look at this with a little bit of a twist. You take job security. All right, I'm with the bigger company, but what about the smaller company that I might buy out or put out of business? What about the job security for those people? So even though these are pros, they're pros for the monopoly itself.
For the monopoly itself.
Yeah.
All right. Then we've got some not so good aspects.
Right.
So the first one is reduced competition. How is this bad? Because we just talked about economies of scale. So that's reducing competition, which should lower the price. Yet
which could lower the price.
Could.
Yeah.
I love how you're saying that. What does this mean?
Reduced competition means we're going to put a lot of people out of business so we can control pricing. What price we want.
So if we want more profit, then we just charge more and nobody
we
can
have
compete.
Goods and services that people need, and now there's nowhere else they can go. So that's really a big con for monopolies.
And if you think about that, and this is where this becomes super dangerous, if I'm a small company and it's costing me $10 to make a widget, and I'm selling that widget for 10, if it costs me 10, maybe we're selling it for $13, $14. So I'm making a $3 to $4 profit. If I'm that huge company and it's costing me $4 to make that same product, I can sell it for $12.50. I can sell it for $13 and make a 90% gain and just undercut. I don't have to do it.
Yep.
I should be selling it for like $8, but I'm going to sell it for 12 or 13, maximize my profit and just go low enough to crush that competition. Yeah. But I'm really not saving the consumer at all. The consumer should be saving $4 or $5.
Right. You're saving a few pennies, but we're making.
And that's where this becomes super dangerous.
Yep.
And that's that risk of monopolistic. Am I saying that right?
Monopolistic
behavior. Yeah. So that is what I'm going to control. I'm the biggest. I'll do whatever I want. Right?
That's right.
That's what we're just talking about. Hey, I've got this control. Nobody can make it cheaper than me. Everybody else is pricing right here. We know the logistics. We know the math. So we're going to come in just below, or we know we can make a superior product for even cheaper than they're making their product, and we can charge the same price or even maybe a little bit more for our product. And if they don't buy it, we're still profitable. But they can control everything. They could actually go back to the product suppliers and say, we're going to buy all this, but you can't sell to them. You can't sell to them, because that's what we're really getting into here, where they're like, no. We are going to control how much money you make because we're buying your product that we need to make our widgets. And we want to put everybody out of business. So you're not allowed to sell to them, or I'm going to take my business somewhere else.
Well, I worked in the textile industry, and a lot of the bigger companies would do that every year. All right, all you dye stuff suppliers, you're going to rebid the price you'll sell it to us. And then for a penny, we'll change to go to a different, vendor. And it got so cutthroat out there. But, they're the big volume in the market, and they're just going to do what they want to do, what they can get away with.
And to every consumer, that is just bad.
Yeah.
Like that. There's nothing good about that.
Who comes out ahead?
No, them.
Yeah.
And then income equality.
That's what you always hear about. Why does the CEO make 153 times more than the average guy on the work floor?
Well, and the funny thing about this is now they try to manipulate it. Like, okay, like Apple's CEO or Amazon or Elon Musk. If you look at their actual salaries, they're nothing. Yep. A lot of times they work for $1, or they're like $100,000 salary just to say they made that much money. But then you look at their stock options and their bonus and their equity of this and equity of that, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars, or even in some cases, hundreds of billions of dollars. So we know the game. Like you're not making $100,000 or whatever they're saying they're making.
Well, that's like what Warren Buffett says. My secretary has to pay a bigger percentage in taxes than I do. Well, it's the way their income is structured. It's not apples to apples.
If you, the one of the ones on here that I really want to zoom in on, we're a small business. If you look at these huge monopoly companies, they can come in and they have a risk to small business. If you look at the vast majority of employees in America, 87%, 90% of employees in America work for a small company.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge percentage.
Huge. So when you have these huge companies dominate, then they want to they're going to put all, like 85% of Americans out of a job.
Yeah.
And an employee. And now with the whole AI and how these big companies the jobs, what used to be a pro, I'm not sure it's going to be a pro anymore, because now they're going to replace you cheaper with some artificial brain, right? And do more quickly. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to AI, but there's a lot of things that are scary about AI. But now these big companies, I'm reading an article a day, 2, 3, 4, 10 articles a day talking about how more efficient they're becoming. And one person is now doing 10 jobs. And they're doing it in less time than the 10 people could do it.
Right.
So there's value, but now this whole job security, this whole paying, the risk to small business, now we're getting into dangerous territory where small businesses could lose their ground. And that's not good for us. Not because we're a small business. It's not good because now the small business owners and small business employees, we run our country. We're 80% of the workflow, of the workforce. So if the government doesn't control the employee of the workforce, they don't have control. But if now with AI, this is a big danger in my opinion, AI plus big business can crush small business.
It can, but I go back to the government having their hand in all of it all the time. I just think back to the COVID era where the Home Depots were allowed to stay open and the small mom and pop hardware stores had to shut down. Why? Because somebody's got their hand in the decisions going on in this country.
And they blew up.
I'll tell you.
And I guess that's a big concern. Okay, so let's turn the page really quick and let's talk about where's the break even, the benefits. Like, how can we give, and this is a tough question, how do we empower investors, consumers to fight against this or to make responsible decisions in light of the fact that so many companies dominate? What do they do?
That's hard to say. If you don't have choices out there, what can you do? It kind of takes me to the way some of the big companies are forcing their investments into ESG, environmental social governance. And by definition, that means, okay, you can't invest in an Exxon or an energy company or something like that. So there's just so much power with the big companies, the big organizations to, follow the money. I don't know. It's kind of a tough world to be in.
This is really tough to give advice and be like, all right, there's a lot of pros and cons out there. If you had a really good business owner, good leader, I look back and I don't want to sound like I'm bashing a company, but there's no way around it, like Walt Disney. I grew up thinking the world of that organization.
Oh, I love watching that show.
My favorite
Sunday
place.
Nights. Yeah.
Oh, which one?
Walt Disney.
Walt Disney?
Yeah.
My favorite place on earth prior to here and recently has been Main Street, USA, in Walt Disney World, Florida, or in Walt Disney in Orlando, Florida. And it's so magical. I mean, my wife and I got married at the Grand Floridian right on Disney property. I mean, that place holds such a soft place in my heart. I mean, we vacationed there every year for the first 13, 14 years of our marriage.
Oh, wow.
Brought our kids there. It's such an important place for us. And yet now, because of whatever you want to call it, woke or political activism or whatever it is, all these big companies have gotten political and they've ruined their image, rightfully or wrong. They might say we've made our image stronger,
right?
Whatever side you want to sit on that. It hasn't strengthened anything in my mind. And now I don't even want to go back.
It's interesting. Getting large, becoming a large company, if you've got the right person at the helm, that's great.
Awesome.
But, the Bible says the heart is desperately, I'll get it right. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So as long as you got the right guy that's got the right heart running these companies, you'll be all right. But at some point in time, you might get somebody else in there.
And that was my point about Walt Disney. Like when he ran that company, I don't know if he was the greatest business mind because I think his brother Roy was.
Yeah.
He was the visionary. He was the lighthearted kid that just wanted to create. And Roy was the numbers guy. He was the yin to his yang, right? He made everything happen. And there was a great partnership. But then he died.
Yeah.
And Walt Disney in that organization was really good. And now we're getting into that gray area of what's right and what's wrong. I grew up with a moral and a value system of one set. And now today it's like everything's flipped upside down. And what used to be right and moral is no longer right and moral. And you're having these huge companies that used to lead that train when I was younger going, no, we can't think that way anymore. There's disproportionate thinking and you're alienating people. So now everything goes. And if you want to be a butterfly, if you want to be a whatever, you go ahead, you change this, you think whatever way, and we'll support you. And there's no more morality. There's no more, a right or wrong. Now everything's free for all. You have to have rules.
Nah, I can't believe how divisive we've become in this country.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And how you disagree with somebody, you're not going to listen to it. You're just going to get in their face and tell them what you think about them.
And ruin everything.
Yeah.
And I guess the point is, when you're a big company, at some point you might have the wrong person leading it. And that's when a good thing, all the pros about it, can flip upside down and now it's detriment because you have the wrong leader.
That's right.
And a leader changes everything. We've seen it in Washington. No matter what side of the aisle you sit on, you're like, this is the guy that's going to create, such a great thing, or this is the person, he or she, that's going to do all this. And you find out once they start leading, that wasn't the greatest thing, or that was great, but it wasn't great, or however you want to think towards it. Leadership determines everything. We don't have there's not a whole lot of advice we can give to our listeners from a consumer standpoint. Like there's nothing we can do other than bound together. And this is where the whole, is it Bud Light, thing, where you had a company do something and they weren't even the biggest player, but they did something and the consumers got together and here's how we're going to stand. And then just here recently, Target did something, that was arguably inappropriate for little kids. And the consumers got together and like, here's what we're going to do. And then these huge companies start shaking because at the end of the day, they're only this big because we make them that big. Right. But if we pull our money back and we act together in a unit, we can change everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the only power that we have. It's how we spend our money, because there's really nothing we can do outside of spending our money for it or against it to encourage a company to change, to lower their prices, to stop acting foolishly with how they're a product provider. Why are you getting political?
Exactly.
I wish companies would stop getting political.
I don't understand that.
You can be as political as you want. Just don't tell me.
Yeah.
Because the moment you open your mouth, like, I hate you now. Like, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to buy your product even though I want to buy your product. I don't want to walk in your store even though I walk in your store. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, I haven't been to Disney World in like 5 years because I can't pull myself to go to that organization because of how political they've become.
They really have. And, musicians, they just get so worked up over something and so vocal about it. Well, half the population is, you're making them mad, and they're not going to support you any longer. So,
yeah. So any last bit of advice that you could give somebody, tell somebody in regards to this, any other bits of nuggets of value that you could give?
Don't you wish we had some nuggets of value when we're talking about this? I just think in my mind, again, who is behind the decisions in letting companies merge or not? Or at what point do you split them up? And what goes on in the background in these huge decisions? So
I'm probably going to just go completely against the advice I just said. And I don't mean this, but you hit a thread with me. I mean, our vote matters.
Yep.
And I mean, it does matter where you spend your money, but it also matters how you vote and the political stand you take, whether you're conservative or not. If you have certain administrations, whatever those are, they might be all for or against big companies. Other ones might be on the other side of that aisle, whether certain ones are completely for it and other ones are completely against it. 1984, that was a very conservative administration. And they changed. They said, no, you can't do this. I don't know about 1911 or what happened in between there, but there are certain administrations that are like, no, big companies are bad for our country. Other administrations might say, no, I don't care how big it is. You can be as big as you want because we want big companies because we don't want little ones. Because the little voices we can't control, but we can control the big ones. So if I were to say anything, I think, your vote matters. Where you spend your money matters. What you do matters. And start spending and voting in a line. And I didn't want this to be political. We haven't talked about politics before the show.
No.
I didn't want that. I hate politics.
Well, the thing is, if people would just be willing to talk to each other, it's okay to have differing opinions about things. When I worked for Milliken, he used to send the young associates to what they call Freedom School, which had a libertarian slant to what they were teaching. And one of the presidents asked Mr. Milliken, said, Roger, you're sending these people to this libertarian-based school, but that's not what you believe, and he sat back and he said, yeah, that's right, but what if I'm wrong? So why not listen to what other people have to say about things and take it into consideration? We all come from different backgrounds and experiences.
I love that, actually. I'm the same. I'm with you. Well, thanks for the discussion today.
Right, this has been great to get back at it.
Oh man, I got a little. I think we got a little bit more on the political side than we wanted to, but I think when you talk about this, I don't know how you can avoid it.
Yeah.
I mean, big companies are allowed or disallowed because of a political party or an administration, and I don't know how you get around that. So, thanks, buddy, for being here.
It was good to be here.